Perhaps, ironically, we can learn from our fusions with animals and machines how not to be man, the embodiment of Western logos. From the point of view of pleasure in these potent and taboo fusions made inevitable by the social relations of science and technology, there might indeed be a feminist science. Donna Haraway, A Cyborg Manifesto. Along with a friend who's just as fascinated by science fiction as I am, I went to a museum in Brühl, which is this small city. My friend had made me aware of their exhibition called Hypercreatures taking place there, which tried to imagine a future in which nature and humanity aren't really separated anymore, and also machines and humanity aren't separated too. Most of the pieces were some kind of strange creature I didn't really understand, but felt what they were meant to symbolize. Quite a lot of them were cyborgs, and the intro text to the exhibition even quoted Donna Haraway's A Cyborg Manifesto. I've always been fascinated by cyborgs, though only now I can truly put into words why. I found them scary but also oddly freeing at the same time. A Cyborg Manifesto brings it to a point brilliantly. Cyborgs are a disruption of systems of power, especially the gender binary. I also learned in disability advocacy that they are a quite big part of the disability movement. I had the idea for making a video of my favorite fictional cyborgs, and I also had separate video ideas for some of them too. So coming across this was the push I needed to actually finally start working on this. Other than the books and series these characters are from, I was mostly inspired by 3 different essays. A Cyborg Manifesto by Donna Haraway from 1985, which I already mentioned, which mostly goes into the topic from a feminist, gender and queer perspective. I will put the link to it in the description. Then a video essay called Robots as Trans Allegory by Ko2 Goldie, which is from 2024. They describe robots in this, but the overlap in the allegory and tropes is big enough that it still works for cyborgs too. Third is a Tumblr post by Cyborg about amputees in Cyberpunk and how sadly quite often their protheses or cybernetics are described as being dehumanizing instead of using it as a criticism for capitalism, which according to them in a large part stems from not enough actually disabled people being in the genre, along with the general cultural ableism. The definition of a cyborg is a living organism, mostly human, with integrated technology to restore or enhance their function. This is why a Cyborg Manifesto describes cyborgs as being liminal beings, aka being 2 things at the same time and so also being nothing at the same time. For example, they are human, but they are also machine. It is an essay about the length of a novella, relatively complicated and abstractly written and so difficult to understand but definitely interesting. So if you can stomach texts like this, I would really recommend giving it a read. It is a feminist, mostly Marxist, analysis of how technology blurs categories and influences people, mostly women. Other than the human-machine binary, it also describes cyborgs shattering the binary between man, as machines are usually associated with man, and women, who are usually associated with nature, as the role of giving birth and caring for children and all that stuff. They also blur public in the form of networks and private in the form of the body. Nature and culture tool and person, mind and matter. They can't really exist in binaries, and so they challenge boundaries, which in my opinion is inherently feminist and inherently queer. This is also visible in the characters I choose for this. 5 out of 8 are canonically disabled, and only 2 out of 8 are canonically queer, but all of them feel queer. They don't behave how people of their gender are usually expected to behave. Quite often they outright challenge these assumptions, and they also have romantic relationships or close friendships that border on romantic, that don't come across as your typical heteronormative relationship. Originally, I planned on making all the entries roughly the same length, but then the last run grew longer and longer and longer and longer, so that now I have 5 spotlights and 1 deep dive, or maybe a recap with analysis. The drawing I colorize as background footage is of Telly and Shay from Scott Westerfeld's Ugly series, having a little homoerotic trainings fight. Their, to put it friendly, messy friendship is the driving force behind all 3 books. Both of them become cyborgs later in the series, and so I will also talk about them. It's important for me to mention that cyborgs do exist in real life, even though the ones I talk about in this are fictional. Being a cyborg is part of activism for several disabilities. For example, Cyborg, the amputee and wheelchair user who wrote this post I mentioned earlier, self-identifies as a cyborg. There are different definitions for what is and isn't a cyborg, but even the strictest, which describes it as technology that interacts with the body for supporting function and is inside or at least permanently connected with the body, fits for technologies like cardiac pacemakers, brain pacemakers, like my grandfather had one for his Parkinson, experimental retina implants that can partially restore vision of blind people, high-end protheses with implants, cochlear implants, and insulin pumps. Then there would be the definition that describes it as technology for supporting functions, which would also include prostheses, wheelchairs, hearing aids, or dialysis machines. And side note, as Cyborg described in their post, you rarely ever see a fictional cyborg with things like a dialysis machine because it's difficult to fictionalize it in a way that is cruel and makes you able to fight enemy robots and stuff with it. According to the loosest definition, which describes technology that makes an organism able to do things it couldn't do without it and is permanent part of life, pretty much every single human on Earth would be a cyborg, because it also includes phones and laptops or contact lenses. However, it usually isn't treated like this in fiction. Cyborg describes that the cyberpunk trope of losing humanity the more implants a person has is very much linked with the dehumanization of disabled people. Because it describes, if you formulate it differently, the more parts of how an able-bodied person's body would work need to be replaced or aided with technology, the lesser human you are. It usually doesn't take the experience of real-life cyborgs into account, and so a character with a cool robot hand or something like that usually isn't really seen as a disabled person, and therefore also not written like one. Originally, the cyberpunk narratives were mostly about corporations owning parts of people's bodies, which is much closer to the real-life experience, because these disability aids are incredibly expensive. For example, a lower leg prosthesis that is low-end, not even something extremely elaborate, is over $5,000. For implants, there's also the additional cost for the surgeries. There also have even already now been cases of companies wanting their implants back. There was this woman who was forced to have hers removed against her will because the company that had created it had gone bankrupt. There also have been people who lost their bionic eyes, which were there to help them with their blindness. And even if the person is lucky enough to not have to experience this, health insurances are usually reluctant at best about paying for these aids. We need to be aware about the reality, even if this is about fictional characters.